bending, broken rule. Hound dog howling, bullfrog croaking. Everything is broken.
Hello and welcome to Dad's Divorce Live. This is Rick Ortiz of DadsDivorce.com. And today we're speaking to Cordell & Cordell attorney Dan Cuneo. And today we're going to talk about infidelity and how that factors into your divorce. Dan, welcome.
Thank you.
Dan, let's start off by, there's been a lot in the news about infidelities, celebrity infidelities and things like that. And I'm curious, how much of a factor is infidelity? How much of a factor is that you see in your caseload?
Well, it's going to depend upon what state you're in, if you're in a no-fault state or a fault state. And then again, even if you're in a no-fault state, meaning that you don't have to prove marital misconduct to have the court dissolve the marriage. Mm-hmm. But in some states, you can use the marital misconduct and ask the court to give you a greater share of the property and a lesser share of the debt, and then your spouse a greater share of the debt and a lesser share of the property.
Okay, so infidelity might matter depending on what state you're in. When a person finds out after being married to their spouse for a while and they find out that their spouse has been unfaithful to them, it's an emotional time. And what I want to know from you is what is it that a potential client needs to be careful for as far as letting their emotions get the better of them? What is the proper way to respond when you find out that your spouse has been having an affair?
Well, there's several ways to respond. There's several things that you can do. And I would say from a litigation standpoint, what you're going to want to do is make sure that you have concrete proof of the fact that there is some type of affair or infidelity.
Now, Dan, are there some forms of evidence that are better than others?
Well, it's going to depend upon what you're actually trying to accomplish, what your goals are. In order to dissolve the marriage, infidelity is infidelity if you're on a fault state or a no-fault state. But if you're trying to use it to get maybe a greater share of custody or sole custody, then really the infidelity that's going to come into play is going to be really determined by what the actual infidelity was. Was it with a person who was convicted of a crime against children? Do they somehow endanger children? Then usually the infidelity will come into play. But you'd have to check the state and the jurisdiction that you're filing in and speak with a licensed attorney and family law to determine whether or not that type of conduct has any bearing or effect on custody. Okay.
Now, if a client, or like I said, a prospective client comes to you, or before they even have gone to an attorney, they suspect that an infidelity is occurring, or maybe they know for a fact that an infidelity is occurring, would you recommend that these men that they show their cards, or is it better to sort of collect evidence, be quiet about them, be quiet about things, be thoughtful, talk to your attorney? What would you recommend?
Well, again, it's really going to go back to what are your goals. If you want to try to work on the marriage and see what we can do to work towards reconciliation, then maybe you want to confront your spouse. But with that being said, you're also putting yourself at risk if you confront your spouse saying, well, I know you're having an affair, there's some type of infidelity going on, here's what I know. Well, then that spouse is going to delete the email account, delete the Facebook account, delete any type of Twittering, MySpace, pictures, text messaging, voicemails, everything. So before you confront, I would think that it would be in your best interest to get a hold of that evidence and put it somewhere. And then you can talk to your spouse and say, I know you're having an affair, and here's how I know or why I know. And then you can work on it to move forward. And that's really something that you'd have to go see a counselor for. Okay. But if you're looking to protect yourself asset-wise, debt-wise, custody-wise, then it really is in your best interest to talk to a lawyer who practices in family law and explain your situation at an initial consultation. Okay.
Tell me, what does an attorney need to have as far as evidence to start building a strong case?
Well, having the actual emails, text messages, voicemails, pictures, something concrete is obviously a lot better than coming in and saying, well, I think, and here's why, and you just have a lot of circumstantial evidence. Right. But even if you're coming in and you don't have anything, you can subpoena phone records, bank records, and we can use that to determine whether or not there's any type of marital misconduct. Because on phone records, it may not show the context of the text itself, but it'll show the number of that text to the number, and then you'll know the date and the time. And also, if you see repeated, multiple phone calls, multiple text messages to a number, well, something's going on.
What information is really irrelevant? Like, for instance, I know a lot of times there's a lot of hearsay brought in and things like that, but what information is just not worth bringing in to a lawyer?
Well, I would think you'd want to just kind of put everything on the table when you first meet with the lawyer, whether it's hearsay, circumstantial evidence, just everything, and let the lawyer determine whether or not that piece of the puzzle or that piece of evidence is helpful. Because at the first meeting, you're really establishing, well, here's what I think the infidelity is or the marital misconduct, and here's why I think this, or here's what I have. And if you don't have anything, then you can tell the lawyer, well, she's been hanging out with this guy a lot, or he's been hanging out with this girl a lot, or I see him or her on the phone a lot with this particular person, or they're spending extra time at work. I mean, those are usually red flags, or the fact that my husband or my wife has lost a lot of weight or has changed the way that they're dressing and their style. So those may be signs and red flags, but if we don't have anything to back it up, then your claim to a potential infidelity may not be as strong.
Let's take it as far as we could probably go with this and say that there are children in your relationship that you now suspect maybe aren't yours. What advice do you offer?
Well, again, it's really dependent upon the jurisdiction that you're filing in, because some jurisdictions will have paternity by estoppel, meaning that you've represented to this child that you're the father. The child calls you dad or looks at you, recognizes you as the father. You supported this child. Also, dependent upon your jurisdiction, courts are going to look at what is in the best interest of the child. And is it really in the best interest after 10 years, 5 years, however many years, that all of a sudden, again, this child thinks of you as dad, and all of a sudden you come and say, well, I'm not. Is that in the best interest of the child? Okay.
Now, at the beginning, you spoke about fault and no-fault states. Just for a refresher course, can we talk a little bit about what that is? What is a fault and a no-fault state?
Sure. A fault state would be a state that you need to prove some type of marital misconduct, whether it be infidelity, emotional, physical, sexual, any type of financial misconduct, something to prove that you can no longer be with this person, and then you want the court to dissolve the marriage. A no-fault state would be where you can just ask the court to dissolve the marriage. It doesn't matter, and for any reason. Okay,
and so then, in a fault state, when you file for divorce and you say that my wife is at fault for having an affair, how does that then trickle down through the case? In other words, because you're in a fault state, you're saying that this person is at fault. Does it necessarily work out that once that person is proven to have been at fault, that they suffer some penalty?
Well, it's going to, again, depend upon the jurisdiction that you're in, because some states, even if you're a no-fault state, if there is a fault, meaning some type of marital misconduct, then you can petition or ask the court to divide the property unequitably or unequally, meaning giving you greater share of the assets and your spouse a greater share of the debt.
And how often does that happen? Practically, how often does that happen that the person who is at fault for having had an affair is penalized?
Well, it's going to, again, depend upon the jurisdiction, because each jurisdiction's got a statute that's going to state, well, here's what we look at to divide the property, and here are the factors that are enumerated. And if conduct of the parties is one of them, such as in Missouri, it's conduct of the parties during the litigation, conduct of the parties during the marriage, is one of several factors that the court takes into consideration when dividing the property and the debt.
Dan, I want to thank you for answering our questions about infidelity as it pertains to divorce. And I want to remind our visitors that if you'd like to submit questions to DadsDivorce.com, go to our Ask a Lawyer link, and we will have those answered by the attorneys of Cordell & Cordell, PC. Also, I want to remind you that if you'd like to hear the full audio version of this video cast, go to the podcast link and click on that, and find the link that pertains to the particular article that you'd like to listen to, and you'll hear the full audio version. For DadsDivorce.com, I'm Rick Ortiz. Thanks for tuning in.